His sirens wailed, the lights died. And in that perfect darkness, someone killed for silence. Only Mrs. Penrose dared to ask what hour. Welcome to the series of Driftaway Tales. Chapter 1, The Air Raid Drill. The winter of 1940, one had turned England into a land of whispers and waiting. Across the country, the nightly sirens had become a kind of second heartbeat, wailing reminders that somewhere above the clouds, unseen wings might return. In the small coastal village of Brindleford-on-Sea, the war felt both far away and frighteningly near. The sea lay beyond the cliffs like a dark lung, drawing breath before the next storm, while in the narrow lanes, blackout curtains sealed every window against the enemy sky. Mrs. Agnes Penrose, headmistress of the village school, stood by her fire that evening, watching the faint flicker of light creep along the hearth tiles. She had covered every crack with care. Light, even the smallest, could draw disaster. Yet she found herself staring into the flames, remembering another winter 1917 when her husband, Thomas, had left for France and never returned. The government called it sacrifice. Agnes called it silence. Now, another war had come, and with it, another silence. Outside, the wind began to move through the lanes, carrying the distant crash of the sea. The wireless crackled. This evening's civil defense exercise will commence at 9 o'clock. All residents are to remain indoors or report to the nearest shelter. Agnes sighed, lifted her scarf, and stepped out into the cold. The sky was ink black, scattered with a few brave stars. From every doorway came the same murmured ritual: good night and keep safe. Down the hill, the parish church loomed like a ship run aground. Its bell tower had been silent for months. The vicar said the clapper was removed in case enemy planes used it as a guide. Lanterns bobbed outside the churchyard gate, where villagers gathered. Mrs. Crane from the post office, old Mr. Lowry the lighthouse keeper, and cheerful young Constable Webb, his steel helmet gleaming. Evening, Mrs. Penrose, Webb called. Best get to the shelter before the siren. They're testing the new generator tonight. I rather doubt it will behave, she said mildly. Engines are like people, Constable. They choose the worst moments to lose courage. He laughed and saluted her with his torch. Agnes descended the steps to the brick-lined shelter beneath the schoolyard. Inside, benches creaked beneath the weight of neighbours clutching blankets and ration bags. Children whispered, mothers hushed, and somewhere a cat meowed indignantly from a basket. At precisely 9 o'clock, the first siren began its long, trembling cry. Lamps dimmed. The village sank into perfect darkness. For a moment, all sound disappeared except for the wind in the trees. Then thunder rolled from the sea, the imitation barrage, from the coastal defences, and the ground seemed to breathe beneath their feet. Agnes sat still, counting the seconds. The air smelled of damp wool and fear. She reached for her knitting bag more for composure than necessity. Beside her, Violet Crane was trembling, her eyes fixed on the narrow entrance where faint light shimmered from the lantern outside. Are you all right, my dear? Agnes asked gently. Violet nodded too quickly. It's only the dark. It feels different tonight. Before Agnes could answer, a single sharp cry pierced the noise outside, high, startled, human. The shelter fell silent. Someone whispered, "What was that?" But the siren's moan swallowed the words. A second later, the electric light flickered and died. Constable Webb's voice echoed from the tunnel mouth. Stay calm, everyone. Might be the generator. They waited. 5 minutes, 10, when the all-clear finally sounded. It came like the first breath after drowning. People spilled out into the night, laughing nervously, grateful to see the stars again. Agnes climbed the steps slowly. The wind had risen, pushing the smoke of extinguished lamps into the street. She pulled her coat tighter and glanced toward the church. A faint glow moved there, someone's lantern, perhaps the vicar, checking the windows. But as she drew nearer, She saw a small crowd forming at the church wall, murmuring. Constable Webb hurried past her, his torch cutting a pale beam through the fog. "Back, please. Give us room." Agnes followed despite herself. The beam steadied on something crumpled against the stoner man, lying face down in the wet grass. His arm stretched awkwardly, hand open as if reaching for a help that never came. When Webb turned the body over, gasps rose around them. It was Arthur Talbot, the grocer. His spectacles hung broken from one ear, and the collar of his overcoat was twisted tight against his neck. The constable knelt, fingers at the pulse, then looked up grimly. Dead. The vicar crossed himself. Good Lord, perhaps he slipped in the dark. Agnes crouched beside the body, ignoring the murmurs. There were rope marks then, distinct, deliberate. And something else, a silver watch glinting faintly against the mud. She brushed it clean and read the dial. 9:16. The second hand had stopped dead. The drill began at 9, she said softly. And the siren failed at 16 past. Webb frowned. That doesn't mean anything, ma'am. Perhaps not, she said, pocketing her handkerchief. But time often knows more than men admit. By the next morning, news had spread across Brindleford like frost. The local paper would call it a tragic accident during blackout practice. The Home Guard would reinforce the shelters, and life would pretend to move on. But Mrs. Penrose, standing by her window with the wireless murmuring enemy reports from the coast, could not forget that stopped watch, or the look on Violet Crane's pale face when the scream had rung out. The war outside Britain's shores was raging, but here in this tiny village, another kind of battle had begun, a quieter one, fought not with bombs or bullets, but with truth and deceit. And Agnes Penrose, who had seen one war already claim everything she loved, knew she would not let this one pass unchallenged. She drew the blackout curtain closed and whispered to herself, if the night hides the killer, then the morning shall find him. Outside, the wind carried the long echo of the sea steady, unbroken, and full of secrets. Chapter 2. The Missing Ration Book. The morning after the blackout drill dawned grey and soundless. The sea mist had rolled inland, hanging low over the rooftops like unspoken grief. Brindleford-on-Sea looked washed out, its usual cheer lost beneath the war's weary palette of brown and blue-grey. Mrs. Agnes Penrose moved quietly through her kitchen, boiling water on the small coal stove and buttering a thin slice of bread. Butter was precious these days, everything was rationed, but so was clear thinking, and she found both hard to come by since the murder. She kept seeing the broken spectacles, the twisted collar, the unmoving watch face. 9:16, a time fixed forever in darkness. By 8 o'clock, a knock came at her door. It was Constable Webb, looking flustered and red-eared in the morning cold. He removed his helmet respectfully as she opened the door. "Mrs. Penrose, I thought you'd like an update. The coroner's been and gone, says Mr. Talbot's death was an accident. Heart failure, most likely. The rope marks could be from falling against the wall." Agnes raised an eyebrow. "Falling backwards while standing upright, I imagine." Webb frowned. "I'm only telling you what was said." She smiled gently, not unkindly. "Of course. And what of his belongings?" "Still missing. His ration book, identity card, wallet all gone. Could have been looted, though. We'll keep an eye on the pawn shops." Agnes sighed. Even war doesn't stop human greed. She hesitated. "Might I see where he lived, Constable? I knew Mr. Talbot a long time. He once sold sweets to half the school children in Brindleford. If there's anything his family might wish returned, I should like to help." Webb looked uncertain, then nodded. "If you must, but don't move anything. The captain from District HQ's expected this afternoon." Half an hour later, Agnes found herself standing before Talbot's grocer's, its door chained, a handwritten sign in the window. "Closed due to emergency." The glass reflected her own face-tired eyes behind rimless spectacles, hair pinned neatly as ever. The village might be shrinking beneath the weight of war, but she still believed in small dignities, tidy buttons, polished shoes, and truth told plainly. She lifted the latchkey Webb had loaned her and stepped inside. The air smelled of dust and oranges, faintly sour from fruit left too long in the dark. Shelves were half empty, tins stacked with army precision. Behind the counter lay the small office, where Talbot kept his ledgers. The walls bore yellowed posters, "Careless talk costs lives," and "Save fuel, save England." She opened the ledger. The neat handwriting stopped to pages before the blackout night. Beneath it, an envelope marked from Major Blake, confidential. Her pulse quickened. She slid it open carefully, revealing only a single torn half of a ration book and a note in Talbot's hand. "If anything happens to me, tell him it's in the post bag." Agnes folded the paper, tucked it into her sleeve, and turned at the creak of the door. Violet Crane stood there, pale and uneasy, clutching her gloves. "I saw you come in," Violet stammered. "They said we shouldn't disturb the shop, but I needed to speak with you." "About the blackout?" Agnes asked softly. Violet hesitated. "About what I heard that night. You'll think I'm mad." "I make no such judgments," Agnes said, pulling out a stool. "Sit down, dear." Violet perched nervously. "I was at my window, just before the siren. I'd been listening to the wireless music, just music. Then I heard footsteps outside. A man's voice said something like 916. And another voice answered, 'The bell will cover it.' Then the siren started." She swallowed. "I didn't tell Constable Webb because—" "Well, it sounds like nonsense, doesn't it?" Agnes' eyes sharpened. "Did you recognize either voice?" "One might have been Mr. Talbot's," Violet whispered. "The other I'm not sure, lower, rougher. Could have been anyone." Agnes looked toward the shop's door. "Did anyone know you were listening?" Violet flushed. "No, I keep to myself mostly." "People talk, they do," Agnes agreed quietly. "Especially in wartime." She glanced again at the ledger, the half-ration book hidden in her sleeve. "Thank you for telling me, Violet. Perhaps nonsense is only sense we don't yet understand." After Violet left, Agnes locked up and walked briskly through the village square. The air had turned colder, the wind sharp from the sea. Posters flapped on walls, warning of spies and saboteurs. She passed the post office where Mrs. Wren, the postmistress, sorted letters with military discipline. "Morning, Mrs. Penrose," she chirped. "Heard about poor Mr. Talbot. Terrible business. I told him not to walk home alone after drills." "Indeed. Tell me, Mrs. Wren, did he handle the post bags himself last night?" "Oh yes," Mrs. Wren replied. "Every evening before 9, he fetched them from the depot. Always punctual, that man. Wouldn't even take tea till he'd locked them in the storeroom." Agnes nodded thoughtfully. "And the night he died, same routine. But when I went to fetch the morning post, one bag was gone. Must have been a mix-up at the depot. Or perhaps," Agnes murmured, "it was never meant to reach the depot at all." That afternoon, she visited Major Rupert Blake, who ran the local Home Guard office from an old railway carriage near the docks. Maps and cigarette smoke filled the cramped space. "Mrs. Penrose, I hear you've been playing detective again," he said with an amused smile. "Not detective, Major, just a teacher. And a tired one," she said. "But this may interest you." She handed him the envelope. He opened it, frowning. Half a ration book. And a note about the post bag. Curious. "Mr. Talbot handled mail for the village," she explained. "If that bag went missing before his death, perhaps he was silenced for what it contained." The Major leaned back. "You're suggesting espionage?" "Here in Brindleford, hardly a nest of intrigue. Evil seldom announces itself," Agnes said quietly. "It hides among milk deliveries and in books." Blake studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well. I'll have men search the depot. But promise me one thing, stay out of harm's way." You've seen what this war does to the curious. I've also seen what silence does, she replied. And it kills far more often. When she left the carriage, dusk was falling. The sea wind carried the scent of salt and coal smoke. Far off, thunder murmured, or was it the guns across the channel? She couldn't tell any more. As she walked home through the darkening lane, she paused by the churchyard where Arthur Talbot had been found. Someone had placed a small wreath of winter flowers on the wall. She bent to adjust the bough and noticed something glinting beneath the grass, a fragment of brown paper, damp but legible. It read, 9:16, delivery confirmed. Agnes straightened slowly, heart tightening. The same time, the same phrase Violet had overheard. She folded the note and whispered into the fog. Then it wasn't panic. It was purpose. Above her, the blackout sky seemed to listen. Chapter 3. The Whispering Lodger. Rain swept through Brindleford-on-Sea the next morning, turning the narrow lanes into rivers of brown water. The storm drummed against the blackout boards and made the air taste of salt and coal. Mrs. Agnes Penrose walked briskly, umbrella tilted, her sensible shoes squelching on the cobbles. War had made everyone practical, and a little suspicious. She had hardly slept. The note found by Arthur Talbot's body, 9:16, delivery, confirmed, lay now in the inside pocket of her coat. She had read it over and over, tracing the smudged pencil lines until the words seemed to whisper in the dark. It was not written by Talbot. She was sure of that. The handwriting was smaller, sharper, a script that tried too hard to look ordinary. The post office came into view through the mist. A faint light glowed behind its curtains. The smell of tea drifted through the letter slot. Agnes rapped twice on the door. It opened a moment later to reveal Violet Crane, pale as the morning, her dark hair pinned hastily and her cardigan buttoned unevenly. Mrs. Penrose. I wasn't expecting. Oh, please, come in. Inside, the post office was a cluttered warren of ledgers, string, and teacups. The wireless hummed faintly, half-tuned between static and music. A kettle rattled on the small stove in the corner. I won't keep you long, Agnes said, folding her umbrella neatly. I came to ask a few questions about Mr. Talbot. Violet hesitated. I've already told Constable Webb everything I know. Yes, Agnes said softly, but you and I both know there are things the police don't ask. Violet's hands twisted in her lap. You think I'm hiding something? I think you're frightened, said Agnes. There's a difference. For a moment, the only sound was the soft drip of rain outside. Then Violet stood abruptly. I'll fetch you tea, she said. Moving toward the stove, her hand shook slightly as she poured, and Agnes noticed a faint burn mark on her wrist, a small circular scar. You work the wireless often, Miss Crane? Violet's head snapped up. Sometimes. I listen for news. Music helps me sleep, of course, and the burn. She glanced down, colour draining from her face. From the kettle. I'm clumsy. Agnes took the cup politely, pretending not to notice the lee. Do you live alone? Yes. My brother was in the RAF, shot down over France last year. Her voice trembled on the last word. I stayed on to keep busy. Mr. Talbot was kind. He brought me tea during drills. I see. Onnes's gaze drifted around the small room. The wallpaper curled at the edges. A thin line of soot marked the wall where a radio wire disappeared behind a framed photograph. A small vase of withered flowers sat beside it. And beside that, a notebook with faded ink. May I? She asked gently, reaching for it. Violet's eyes widened. It's only addresses, villagers, post records. But Agnes had already glanced at the open page. Each line was a name followed by a series of numbers, 4 digits, always beginning with 09. These aren't addresses, she said. They look like timings, signals, perhaps. Violet snatched the notebook, slamming it shut. You've no right. I have every right, Agnes said, standing slowly. A man was murdered, Miss Crane. And whatever you are part of intentionally, Or not, it's dangerous. Mr. Talbot died trying to protect something. Perhaps even you. Violet's eyes filled with tears. You don't understand. I never meant. I didn't know it would lead to. She stopped herself, trembling. Onnez's tone softened. Then tell me what you do know. A long silence followed. Rain rattled harder against the windows. Finally, Violet whispered, "There's a signalman down by the docks, a sailor named Briggs. He said the government needed local eyes to help track enemy transmissions. He gave me a code to repeat on certain nights, so they could trace the source of German signals. I thought I was helping the war effort." And the phrase delivery confirmed. Violet shook her head. "That wasn't mine. That was his. Captain Howard Briggs." Agnes murmured. She remembered his name from the gossip after the blackout. A naval officer, stationed temporarily near the coast. "And you've been sending these signals how?" Violet pointed to the wall. "The radio. He tuned it for me. I never saw the messages go, only the light blink." Agnes walked closer to the shelf where the wireless sat. Behind it, a small panel of the wall was darker, recently replaced. She touched it lightly. The board shifted under her fingers, revealing a shortwave transmitter, smaller than her teapot, wires snaking down toward a battery box. "Dear heaven," she whispered, "do you realize what this is? You weren't helping the Admiralty, my dear, you were helping the enemy." Violet backed away, horrified. "No, that can't be. He said we were jamming their frequency." "Whoever he is," said Agnes, "he lied." A heavy knock shook the door. Both women froze. Constable Webb called a muffled voice. "Open up, Miss Crane." Agnes straightened her coat. "Best to let him in." Violet looked terrified. "He'll arrest me." "Perhaps not," Agnes said. "Perhaps he should see what I have found first." Webb entered, rain dripping from his helmet. His eyes darted from Violet's pale face to the open transmitter. Well, what's all this?" Agnes met his gaze calmly. "Miss Crane has been transmitting under false instructions, likely given by Captain Howard Briggs. She didn't know. I suggest you inform Major Blake at once." Webb scratched his chin. "Briggs, thought he'd cleared out last week. But if she's been sending messages." He stepped closer to the set, frowning. "Strange. No dust on the dial. Someone's used it recently." Violet clutched her cardigan. "I haven't touched it since the blackout night." Webb tested the plug, then turned to Agnes. "We'll need to take this in, and Miss Crane too, for questioning." Agnes placed a steady hand on Violet's arm. "She's frightened, Constable, not guilty. I'll accompany you, if I may. Suit yourself, ma'am." As they stepped into the rain, the sky thundered above them. Somewhere out at sea, faint and distant, a low rumble echoed, not storm, but artillery. The war was closer than ever. Violet walked silently beside Agnes, her tears lost in the downpour. "I only wanted to help," she whispered. "He said I could make a difference." Agnes looked at her sadly. "War is full of men who tell women what they want to hear, my dear. But truth rarely needs persuading." At the end of the lane, soldiers were already waiting, their lamps cutting through the fog. They led Violet toward the waiting jeep, her small figure swallowed by uniforms and rain. As the engine started, Constable Webb turned back to Agnes. "Good work, ma'am. You've a sharp eye." She didn't answer. Her gaze was fixed on the window, above the post office, where a faint light still flickered. For a moment, she could swear she saw a shadow move, tall, deliberate, watching. When she looked again, it was gone. She wrapped her scarf tighter and murmured into the rain. "So it wasn't you, poor girl. The real whisperer's still out there." The wind carried her words away toward the sea. Chapter 4. The Letter from London. The following day dawned with a pale, uneasy sun. Brindleford-on-Sea looked deceptively peaceful under its golden light, the cobblestones drying from last night's rain, the smell of bread from Mrs. Hewitt's bakery drifting down the high street. Yet for all its small comforts, Mrs. Agnes Penrose felt only a deepening chill. Violet Crane had been taken to the Home Guard station before dawn. Major Blake himself had come from the garrison at Portsmouth to question her. The news spread through the village faster than gossip about ration butter. The post office girl, a spy. Women whispered it behind their hands at the butcher's queue, and men shook their heads as if disappointed by the frailty of youth. Agnes, walking to school that morning, heard enough to know how stories twist when fear leads the telling. In truth, Violet had been a pawn. Someone clever as someone colder had used her trust and her grief. Mrs. Penrose had seen it before. Wars had a way of drawing clever liars to quiet villages. By mid-morning, a soldier on a motorbike arrived at the school gate with a brown envelope. "From Major Blake, ma'am," he said, saluting before roaring off again. The envelope bore an official stamp. Home Security, Confidential. Agnes waited until the children were busy with their arithmetic before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of typewritten paper, folded twice. Mrs. Penrose, interrogation of Miss Crane suggests she acted under orders from a man calling himself Captain Howard Briggs. Her transmissions match German naval frequencies. We've circulated his description to coastal units, but he's vanished. Enclosed you will find a letter intercepted last night at the London Censor's office, originally addressed to Brindleford-on-Sea. It may pertain to our investigation. Your discretion is requested, as always. Major R. Blake. Beneath the note lay a second envelope, its edge still slit from inspection. The handwriting was familiar, though slightly shaky. Arthur Talbot, the letter he never lived to send. Agnes unfolded it carefully. "Dear Major, I fear I've stumbled upon something I shouldn't have. There's a list of numbers hidden among the post ledgers, all marked for the coast. If I disappear, you'll know who took them. Look for the letter dated January 9th. Talbot." A single smudge of blue ink followed his name, if he'd been interrupted mid-thought. Agnes leaned back in her chair, staring at the handwriting. January 9th. She reached for her own notebook, where she'd kept the dates of the recent drills. January 9th had been the night of the blackout, the night he died. Her mind raced. The list of numbers might refer to the coded timings Violet had copied from her supposed contact. But what did for the coast mean? Supply routes, ship movements, or something darker? When the school bell rang at noon, Agnes dismissed her pupils early, saying the air raid risk had increased. In truth, she needed time. She locked her classroom and made her way toward the church, her thoughts heavy. The vicar, Father Benedict Shaw, was in the vestry polishing candlesticks. He was a gentleman, stooped and silver-haired, his face carved by whirring. He looked up as she entered. "Mrs. Penrose, I heard about poor Miss Crane. Is it true?" "She's frightened, not guilty," Agnes said firmly. "But there's something I must ask you, Father. The night of the blackout you said someone came to you for confession." He hesitated. "I did, but you know I can't reveal a confession." "I don't ask for a name," she said softly. "Only did they speak of guilt?" His eyes lowered. "They did. Guilt. And betrayal. They said they'd done what was asked and that others would follow, as they stayed silent. I tried to persuade them to go to the police, but they left in haste." "Did they mention the time?" He frowned, thinking. "Yes. They said they had to return to the cliffs before 9:15. Onnez's heart gave a small, hard beat. 9:16. Always the same number. "Father," she said gravely, "if that person comes again, send word to me first. Their soul may depend on more than prayer." He nodded solemnly. As she stepped back into the churchyard, the sea wind whipped her scarf across her face. A few gulls wheeled above the cliffs, their cries thin and sharp. Something was stirring in the village, a sense of being watched. Even the air seemed to listen. At the grocer's corner, Constable Webb was chalking a notice on the wall. "All clear, drill tonight 9 p.m. He waved his chalk in greeting. Evening practice again, Mrs. Penrose. The home guard wants to keep folks alert. How fortunate, she replied dryly. Perhaps they'll stay alive this time. He chuckled, not catching her meaning. Back home, she lit her small lamp and sat by the table, spreading the intercepted letter, Talbot's note, and her own observations in neat order. On impulse, she reached for the London envelope again. There was a faint imprint on its flap letters, indented by the weight of the pen. She held it to the lamplight, tilting it until the impression became readable. BRGS. Her breath caught. Briggs. A sudden knock startled her. The lamplight flickered as she opened the door to find Major Blake, cap in hand, coat dripping from the fog. "Forgive the intrusion," he said briskly. "Miss Crane's story checks out partly. Briggs is no longer listed at his station. The Navy says he resigned 3 months ago, citing illness." "Convenient timing," Agnes murmured. "Indeed. He's gone to ground somewhere near the coast. And there's something else. Your postmaster's log shows a telegram from London addressed to him last week. Signed only with the initial B. We think he had an accomplice here." Agnes looked up sharply. "Then Brindleford still hides a traitor." "Possibly two," Blake said grimly. "If Briggs used Miss Crane, he needed a second local contact to collect information. Someone respected, invisible." Their eyes met in the lamplight. Both knew such people existed in every village. Blake sighed. "We'll search the docks at first light. You, meanwhile, might keep your ears open. You have a gift for hearing what others miss." After he left, Agnes returned to her notes. The wind howled down the chimney. Her lamp fluttered. She thought again of Violet's trembling words. He said we were jamming the enemy. She pulled her cardigan tighter and stared at the ration book scrap she'd found in Talbot's ledger. The page number was faint but legible. Page 47. Her teacher's mind ticked. 47 was also the parish postcode for Brindleford-on-Sea. Coincidence, perhaps, or a marker. At 9 that night, as the village prepared for another blackout drill, Mrs. Penrose stood by her window, watching the lamplighter make his rounds. In the distance, the sea murmured under the fog. Somewhere out there, ships waited for signals they should never receive. She turned down the flame of her lamp and whispered, "If this war is fought in shadows, then shadows shall have their reckoning." Outside, the siren began its long, low cry once more. Chapter 5. Secrets Beneath the Chapel. The village of Brindleford-on-Sea had known peace once, long before the sirens, the ration books, and the whispers of spies. But now it felt as if every stone hid a secret, every kind word carried an echo of doubt. Mrs. Agnes Penrose walked through the narrow lane toward the old chapel, the one that leaned slightly toward the sea, as though listening to the waves. The vicarage bell tolled noon, a slow hollow sound that drifted through the grey air. Agnes had arranged to meet the caretaker to collect a box of blankets stored in the chapel cellar. At least that was her official reason. In truth, the building had haunted her thoughts ever since Father Shaw's confession of a mysterious visitor and his mention of the time before 9:15. She stepped through the churchyard gate, boots crunching on gravel. The air smelled of salt and candle wax. The chapel doors creaked open under her hand, and the sound of her footsteps echoed in the chill nave. Light filtered through high-stained glass windows, painting faint colours on the flagstones. "Mr. Lowry," she called. From the shadows near the altar, Thomas Lowry, the elderly lighthouse keeper, emerged, carrying a lantern. His face was ruddy, his beard flecked with grey. "Ah, Mrs. Penrose, didn't expect you so soon. I like to arrive before the weather changes," she said. "It smells like rain." He chuckled. "Always does near the sea." He led her down a narrow stairway to the cellar, a damp space lined with crates of tinned food, spare sandbags, and church supplies. The air was heavy with mildew. A single bulb glowed overhead, swaying slightly from the draught. As they moved the boxes, Agnes noticed something peculiar, a rope lantern, its wick freshly cut, lying half buried under a pile of hymnals. Beside it, a small metallic glint caught her eye. She bent to pick it up. It was a button, tarnished and worn, embossed with the anchor and crown emblem of the Royal Navy. "Odd place for that," she murmured. Lowry scratched his beard. "Probably fell off a uniform. We've had plenty o' sailors in here during the last raid." Agnes studied his face. "You were on duty at the lighthouse that night, weren't you, during the blackout drill?" He nodded. Though not much light to keep then. Orders were clear, lamp stays covered, till further notice. And yet, Agnes said slowly, someone signalled that night. A light flashed toward the sea just before the siren failed. 3 short, 2 long, recognize that code. He froze, the smile slipping from his face. "Can't say I do." "I think you can," she said gently. "Because that same code appears in a letter Mr. Talbot tried to send. He knew the signal was coming from near the cliffs, from this very chapel, perhaps." Lowry's lantern flickered. "You're barking up the wrong tree, ma'am." "I just keep the tower, perhaps," she said. "But tell me, who has the key to this cellar, apart from you?" He hesitated a beat too long. "Father Shaw, I suppose, maybe the verger." Agnes turned to the far wall, where a low archway had been bricked up halfway. The mortar was new, still pale against the old stone. She ran a finger across it. "Was this sealed recently?" "Last month, after the bombing near the coast," he said quickly. "Safety reasons, safety," she repeated, almost to herself. "Or secrecy." Lowry's expression darkened. "Now see here, Mrs. Penrose, you're a clever woman, but you don't know what you're stirring. I know a man was murdered because he found something he shouldn't," she replied. "And I know you were the last to see Captain Briggs alive." He stepped back, eyes narrowing. "Who told you that?" "No one had to," she said. "You just did." The silence between them thickened. The bulb above swayed again, shadows rippling along the walls. For a moment, Agnes thought he might strike her, but instead he sighed, his shoulders sagging. "All right," he muttered. "Briggs came to the lighthouse 3 nights before the blackout, said he needed a clear view of the coast for a training exercise. He paid well enough. I didn't ask questions. War makes fools of honest men, Mrs. Penrose." "And did he bring anything with him?" "A small case. Said it was equipment. But after the drill, I found him again, near the cliffs, half drunk and raging. He said someone had betrayed him, that he'd be finished if the Navy found out what he'd done. Then he ran off toward the church road." Onnes's heart quickened. "And you didn't report this?" He shook his head miserably. Didn't know who to trust. "Next morning, word came he was dead." The bulb flickered again. And this time, it didn't come back on. The cellar sank into near darkness. Larry lifted his lantern, muttering, "Blast the power lines," but Agnes was no longer listening. Her eyes had adjusted enough to see something gleaming in the half-light. A small metal case, wedged behind her. Sandbag stack. Carefully, she pulled it free. It was dented but intact, with initials scratched faintly into the lid. "H.B. Howard Briggs," she whispered. Inside lay a handful of damp papers and a folded map marked in red pencil, the coastline, with small crosses at regular intervals. Numbers ran alongside. 0916, 0932, 0948. Timing codes. Agnes breathed. Not signals to the enemy. Schedules. For what, I wonder? Before Larry could answer, a sudden sound echoed from above. The faint slam of the chapel door. He looked up sharply. "We locked it." Footsteps crossed the nave. Slow, careful. "Who's there?" Lowry called. No answer. Only the creak of floorboards. "Closer now." And then the unmistakable scrape of the bolt sliding into place from the outside. Agnes felt her pulse leap. "They're locking us in." Lowry raised his lantern, eyes wide. "But who?" The light flickered once more and went out. plunging them into complete darkness. Somewhere in that black silence, a voice whispered, low, close, and calm, "Curiosity, Mrs. Penrose, is a dangerous habit." She froze, the map still in her hands, as the sound of retreating footsteps faded above. And for the first time since the war began, she felt truly afraid. Chapter 6: The Confession That Never Came. When the chapel door was finally forced open the next morning, the first light of dawn fell across Mrs. Penrose's pale face and the dust that clung to her coat. She had spent the night sitting upright beside the old lighthouse keeper, Mr. Lowry, both of them shivering in the dark after their unseen visitor had locked them inside. Whoever had done it had left without a word. Only the echo of that whisper still lingered in her ears. Curiosity, Mrs. Penrose, is a dangerous habit. By the time Constable Webb arrived with a crowbar, the intruder was long gone. "Someone's got a cruel sense of humor," he muttered, inspecting the heavy bolt that had sealed the door. "You might have suffocated in there if the vent had been shut." "Then I'm grateful for small mercies," Agnes replied dryly, brushing off her skirt. "Has Father Shaw been informed?" Webb hesitated. "That's the thing, Mum. The vicar didn't answer his bell this morning. Housekeeper says he stayed late at the church last night. We've just found him." Her stomach tightened. "Found him?" Webb's tone turned grim. "In his study, dead." The vicarage stood across the square, a neat stone house with ivy crawling up its walls. Inside, the air smelled of cold tea and candle smoke. Father Shaw lay slumped in his chair, head tilted to one side, his Bible open on the desk before him. The constable's torch beam swept over the scene, the untouched breakfast tray, the toppled cup, the small bottle beside his hand. "Doctor says heart failure," Webb said softly, but Agnes followed his gaze to the rim of the cup, a faint white residue clinging to the edge. "Powdered," she murmured. "Sedative, perhaps," he nodded. "Could have been self-inflicted. Stress of the times and all." Agnes looked at the gentle lines of the old priest's face. "No," she said quietly. "This man was troubled, yes, but not despairing. He promised to tell me if his visitor returned." She stepped closer, scanning the desk. Among the scattered papers lay a small torn scrap, part of a hymn sheet, its margin marked in pencil, 9:16, silence. Her throat tightened. The same code again. Webb frowned. "You think it's connected to Talbot?" "I think Father Shaw died because he knew too much," she said. "And I mean to know what that was." Later that day, the rain began again, a relentless drizzle that turned every sound into a whisper. Mrs. Penrose returned to the chapel cellar to retrieve the metal case she'd hidden behind the altar before the constable's arrival. Inside, the damp papers still smelled faintly of salt. She spread them carefully across her kitchen table. The map showed the coastline between Brindleford and Portsmouth, with small crosses drawn offshore. Alongside each was a number: 0916, 0932, 0948. "Time intervals," she muttered. "But for what?" "Not convoys. Those are charted by the Admiralty." Her eyes caught a faint scrawl at the corner: "Sundown deliveries confirmed." She remembered Talbot's note. "It's in the post bag." Deliveries, messages, or perhaps contraband. At that moment, a firm knock sounded at her door. She quickly gathered the papers into an envelope before answering. Major Blake stood outside, his uniform damp from rain. "You've been difficult to reach, Mrs. Penrose," he said, stepping in without waiting. "I hear you had an adventure in the chapel." "Adventure," she repeated, arching an eyebrow. "Is that what we're calling murder now?" he sighed. "Webb told me about Father Shaw. It's a damn shame. But you must understand, the War Office won't tolerate civilians meddling in intelligence matters." "I don't meddle, Major," she said evenly. "I observe. There's a difference." Blake glanced toward her desk. "And what have you observed this time?" She hesitated. Something about his tone was sharper than usual, too controlled. But she handed him the copy of the map she'd traced. These times correspond with the blackout drills. Whoever arranged them was using the sirens as cover to send signals to sea. Blake examined the map, brow furrowed. "You're certain of this?" "Quite." He tapped the paper thoughtfully. "Then I'll need to take this for verification." She smiled faintly. "Of course, Major, though I'll keep the original. Teachers are cautious by nature." He looked up sharply, then gave a forced chuckle. "You're a remarkable woman, Mrs. Penrose. Remarkable enough to recognize danger when it stands in my parlor," she replied. Their eyes held for a moment before he tipped his hat and left. When the door closed behind him, she leaned against it, heart pounding. She had seen it then, just for a second, the edge of the ration book in his pocket. Talbot's ration book. That evening, the rain turned to wind, lashing the windows. Agnes wrapped herself in a shawl and tried to think. Father Shaw's death, Talbot's warning, the vanished Captain Briggs, all threads in a web that pointed inward, not outward. The traitor wasn't a stranger sneaking ashore under moonlight. He was here, among them. At 8:30, a soft knock came again. She opened the door to find Violet Crane, pale and trembling, her clothes soaked through. "They let me go," she gasped. Major Blake said there wasn't enough evidence. "But, Mrs. Penrose, I'm afraid I think they're watching me." "Come in," Agnes said, ushering her to the fire. "Who's watching you?" "I don't know. I saw a man near the post office stall, coat collar up. When I turned to look again, he was gone." Agnes handed her a cup of tea. "Fear makes every shadow move, my dear. But you did right to come." Violet stared into the flames. "Do you think Father Shaw's death was my fault? I went to him once, you see. I told him about the transmissions. He said he'd pray for me." Her voice broke. "Now he's dead." Agnes reached out, resting a hand on hers. "You're not to blame. War punishes innocence far more than guilt." The clock struck 9. Another blackout drill was due to begin. She moved to draw the curtains. Through the narrow gap, she saw movement by the gate, a flash of light, quickly extinguished. 3 short, 2 long. She froze. Violet followed her gaze. "What is it?" "Stay here," Agnes whispered, reaching for her coat. "And if I'm not back by morning, find Constable Webb." She slipped out into the cold night. The wind tore at her scarf, carrying the sound of the siren far across the rooftops. Down by the churchyard, a figure moved toward the cliffs, lantern low against the storm. Agnes followed, keeping to the shadows. The ground was slick, the path narrow. The lantern ahead stopped suddenly, turned, and its beam fell directly on her face. Major Blake's voice cut through the wind. "Mrs. Penrose, I rather hoped it would be you." He smiled then, not the polite smile of an officer, but the calm, knowing smile of a man who has stopped pretending. And in that moment, she realized the truth. She had been reporting her discoveries to the very traitor she sought. Chapter 7. The Spy Among Them. The wind off the sea howled like a living thing. Rain struck in hard, slanting sheets that blurred the cliff edge and made the lantern's beam quiver like a candle about to die. Mrs. Agnes Penrose stood perfectly still, her coat plastered to her frame, her scarf whipping around her face. Major Rupert Blake stood a few yards ahead, the yellow light of his lamp illuminating his sharp, composed features. "Major," she said, her voice steady despite the gale, "I see now that you've been waiting for me." He smiled faintly. "You always were quicker than the rest of them. It's a pity you had to start digging. You'd have lived longer if you'd left it to the professionals." "I thought I had left it to the professionals," she said. "But you seem to have changed professions, Major Blake, from soldier to traitor." He sighed, almost wistful. "Don't be dramatic, Mrs. Penrose. I serve England, in my own way. This war isn't won by sentiment, but by survival. Selling naval schedules to the enemy is survival." He lifted the lantern. its beam cutting across his rain-slick face. When your own command refuses to listen, when the Admiralty ignores the warnings, yes. I made a bargain, and in the end, everyone profits. Except those who die keeping your secrets, Agnes said, taking a step closer. Blake's eyes hardened. Arthur Talbot was careless. He read a letter he shouldn't have. And Father Shorewell, the good vicar, couldn't hold his tongue. So you silenced them both. He tilted his head. You're perceptive, Mrs. Penrose. You always have been. That's why I admired you. Her expression didn't change. Admiration from a murderer is a poor comfort. Lightning flashed above them, revealing the dark swell of the sea far below. In its brief glare, Agnes saw something glint near Blake's boot, a small pistol, half concealed in the folds of his coat. You've gone too far to stop now, she said softly. Even if you kill me, someone will follow the trail. He laughed. Trail? There is no trail. When they find your body on the rocks, they'll say you slipped while chasing ghosts. Behind him, a second light flickered, dim, distant, moving along the path from the village. He noticed it too, and turned sharply. Expecting company, she asked. He cursed under his breath. Webb. Constable Webb's voice carried faintly through the wind. Major, Mrs. Penrose. What's going on? Blake raised his pistol. One more accident won't matter. But Agnes moved first. With the calm of a teacher scolding an unruly pupil, she picked up a handful of wet sand from the cliff edge and flung it into his face. He cried out, stumbling back. The gun fired once, the shot vanishing into the storm. Stop, Webb shouted, running closer. Blake turned, firing again. The bullet struck the ground inches from Onnes's feet. Webb dove behind a boulder, his lamp swinging wildly. Agnes ducked low, her heart hammering. The wind tore at her coat as she crawled toward the fallen lantern. Blake wiped his eyes and steadied his aim. You should have stayed in your classroom, Mrs. Penrose. And you, she called back, should have stayed a man of honor. Her hand closed around the lantern. She swung it upward, the glass shattering against his arm. He cursed, stumbling backward, and his boot found nothing but air. For a moment, his face was illuminated by the flash of lightning, shock, rage, disbelief. Then he was gone, swallowed by the blackness below. The waves thundered against the cliffs. Webb rushed to her side, panting. Good Lord, he's fallen. She stared into the abyss. The sea keeps its own secrets, Constable. He wiped rain from his eyes. But if he's dead, the case is closed. The spy's gone. Agnes shook her head slowly. No, Webb. Blake was clever, but he wasn't alone. Every message needs a sender and a receiver. He may have sent the orders, but someone else made sure they reached the enemy. Webb frowned. You mean there's still another? Yes, she said quietly, and whoever locked me in that chapel last night wasn't Blake. They reached the village near midnight, soaked and silent. The streets were empty under the blackout. Only the faint glow from the home guard hut broke the darkness. Inside, Webb poured her a cup of weak tea, his hands still shaking. Blake's men will be at the cliffs by morning, he said. If they find him, they won't, Agnes said. The tide will have taken him. She sipped her tea and stared into the steam. But his accomplice will know the plan has failed. They'll act soon, before anyone connects the dots. What dots? Every death, every clue. They were meant to bury the truth. Talbot, sure, even Violet Crane's arrest, all convenient distractions. The real work continued, while the village whispered. Webb frowned. You think it's someone here? I know it is. She leaned closer. Tell me, Constable, where were you the night I was trapped in the chapel? He blinked. Me. I was home. My wife can vouch for. You're not married, she said evenly. You told me that yourself. He froze, the color draining from his face. Agnes set down her cup carefully. You've been too eager, Mr. Webb, always first on the scene, always the one to bring news. You arrived at the chapel before dawn. How did you know I was inside, unless you'd been watching? He stood abruptly. You're mistaken. I don't think so, she said. You helped Blake, didn't you? You handled the reports, the evidence. You kept the investigation pointing the wrong way. His eyes darted to the door. You've no proof. Perhaps not, she said calmly, rising. But you've just given me all I need. He took a step back, hand reaching for his holster. You won't stop me, old woman. Before he could draw, the door burst open. Violet Crane stood there, pale but resolute, a revolver trembling in her hands. Oh, but she will, she said. Webb froze. Violet. I followed you, she whispered. When you came back from the cliffs, I heard everything. He lunged toward her, but Agnes caught the kettle from the stove and flung the boiling water across his arm. He screamed, dropping to his knees. Violet's gun clattered from her hand, but Webb was finished, shaking, clutching his burned wrist. Agnes exhaled, steady and cold. It's over, Constable, or whatever you truly are. He looked up at her, hatred burning in his eyes. You'll never understand. The war was lost long before you found your clues. Perhaps, she said softly, but truth still matters. Outside, the sirens began to fade. The storm was dying, the wind easing into a mournful sigh. Violet stood trembling beside her. What happens now? Agnes looked toward the dark window, where the first hint of dawn struggled against the clouds. Now, my dear, we tell the truth, and pray the world still listens. She turned away from the captured spy and the dying fire, knowing that this quiet, invisible war was not yet over. Chapter 8. The storm returns. By the following evening, the sea had grown restless again, hammering against the cliffs as if it, too, demanded justice. The storm that had faded at dawn returned with new fury, black clouds bruising the sky, the wind rising in long, angry gusts that rattled the shutters of Brindleford-on-Sea. The villagers barred their doors early, and even the home guard drills were cancelled. But inside the vicarage, the lamp still burned. Mrs. Agnes Penrose stood near the hearth, her notebook open, papers neatly arranged across the small table. Violet Crane sat opposite her, pale but composed now, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. Outside, thunder rolled far out at sea, like the slow beat of an approaching army. Are you sure he'll confess? Violet asked quietly. Onnes's eyes didn't leave the page. Oh, he already has. Not in words, but in panic. Men like Constable Webb always leave loose ends. Fear makes poor handwriting of life. She flipped a page, reading from her notes. He claimed to have worked for Major Blake, but the map we found in the chapel, those codes weren't naval schedules. They were shipping times for supply convoys. Someone was passing them to German submarines stationed off the channel. And Blake, clever though he was, wasn't high enough to have those figures. Then who? That's the question. Agnes looked toward the window, where lightning flared briefly, illuminating the rain. Blake was the messenger, Webb was his shadow. But both took orders from someone above, someone close enough to the village to know every blackout drill, every siren test. Someone who could move freely without suspicion. A sharp knock broke the thought. Violet flinched. Agnes closed her notebook calmly. That will be him now. The door opened to reveal Dr. Eleanor Merritt, the village physician, her cloak soaked through and her gloved hands gripping a small leather case. Forgive the intrusion, she said breathlessly. The constable asked me to bring these. He's at the home guard post under guard, but he's complaining of pain from his burns. How dutiful of you, Agnes said mildly, taking the case, but not opening it. And yet, I don't recall summoning a doctor. Dr. Merritt hesitated. I thought it best to assist. After all, we're on the same side, aren't we? Agnes asked. A tense silence followed, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Violet shifted uncomfortably, watching the two women. I've always admired you, Mrs. Penrose, Dr. Merritt said softly. A fine mind, a steady heart, but perhaps too steady. The world is changing. This war isn't black and white anymore. You should understand that. I understand good and evil quite well, Agnes replied. And I've seen how often they wear each other's clothes. The doctor smiled faintly, but her eyes were cold. Then you know why people do desperate things. I didn't start this. I only wanted to save someone I loved. Nessie's tone sharpened. Your husband. The colour drained from Dr. Merritt's face. So you know, taken prisoner in France, wasn't he? Agnes said, you received a letter months ago, and not from him, but from someone claiming to represent the German command. They offered his release in exchange for information. Tears gleamed in the doctor's eyes. You don't understand. They said he was alive, that he'd come home if I helped them just once. Just one signal, I thought. You thought you could outwit them, Agnes finished gently. But bargains with devils rarely end well. Dr. Merritt's trembling hand slipped into her cloak. I never meant for anyone to die, yet 3 have, Agnes said quietly. And you're about to make it 4 if you draw that pistol. The room froze. Violet gasped as Dr. Merritt's hand emerged, clutching a small revolver. Please, the doctor whispered, just give me the papers. The map, the codes, I can end this. They'll let him go. Agnes didn't move. They'll let no one go, you know that. Lightning flashed again, flooding the room with white light. For a moment, Agnes saw the doctor's face clearly, wet with tears, desperate, broken. Then came thunder, a deafening crack that made the glass rattle. When the sound faded, Violet had risen to her feet, stepping between them. Dr. Merritt, please, don't do this. The doctor's hand trembled. You don't understand, child. Love can make murderers of us all. Nessie's voice cut through the storm, calm and low. And love can make heroes, too. The difference lies in who you choose to save. The doctor faltered, her breath catching. For a moment, the pistol lowered, but only a little. I can't go to prison, she said. They'd hang me for treason. Not if you tell the truth, Agnes said. Confess. Let the world know Blake's plan, Webb's betrayal. And this before it destroys more lives. Dr. Merritt's eyes flickered, torn between hope and despair. Then a new sound broke through, the distant roar of an engine. Violet turned toward the window. There's a car coming from the garrison. Nessie's expression hardened. The War Office, no doubt. They'll want to tie up loose ends. Dr. Merritt's face went pale. Then it's too late. The revolver came up again. Violet screamed. The shot went wide, shattering a photograph on the mantel. Before the doctor could fire again, Agnes lunged forward, striking her wrist with the edge of the kettle. The gun clattered to the floor. Merritt stumbled back, clutching her hand in shock. Agnes caught her arm, steadying her. No more lies, she said. You've done enough. The doctor sagged against her, weeping. I just wanted him home, I know, Agnes whispered. But now we bring him home in truth, not in shame. Outside, the car screeched to a stop. Soldiers pounded up the path. Within moments, the door burst open, and 2 officers entered, rain streaming from their coats. Dr. Eleanor Merritt, one said sharply, you are under arrest for conspiracy against the Crown. She didn't resist. As they led her away, she turned once toward Agnes, her eyes hollow. They'll never forgive me. Then seek forgiveness where it's still given, Agnes said softly. In the light, when the door closed, silence returned. Violet sat trembling by the fire, tears streaking her face. It's over, she said. Isn't it? Agnes stared into the flames. Wars rarely end cleanly, my dear. There's always one more storm on the horizon. Thunder boomed again, shaking the windows. Violet looked toward her. And what will you do now? Agnes took up her notebook. Its cover worn, but steady in her hands. What I've always done, she said. Write it down, remember it. Because someday, when the world forgets what fear looks like, someone will need reminding. Outside, Lightning split the sky once more, lighting the sea in silver. The storm raged on, but in Mrs. Penrose's small sitting room, the fire burned steadily, the only light left in Brindleford that refused to go out. Chapter 9. Truth in the Wind. The storm had passed, but Brindleford-on-Sea did not feel calmer. The next morning dawned pale and heavy, the air thick with damp. The sea lay bruised under a low, colourless sky. Roof tiles glistened with rain, and smoke rose from chimneys like weary sighs. The village had survived another night, yet an unease lingered, the kind that no siren or curfew could quiet. Mrs. Agnes Penrose stood at her window, watching the fog drift over the fields. Her mind was sharp but her body tired. The night before had left its mark, not in injury, but in the hollow ache that follows confrontation. Dr. Eleanor Merritt's arrest had sent ripples through the village. Some pitied her, others called her traitor. Agnes, as ever, saw the truth in between. She turned from the window as the clock struck 9. Violet Crane entered quietly with a tray of tea. "They're saying the doctor confessed," she said, setting the tray down. Agnes nodded, yes, to signalling convoys, to hiding maps in the chapel cellar, to sending the messages she thought would free her husband. She said Blake blackmailed her, in part. But her choice was her own. Onnes's voice softened. "War gives us reasons to do wrong and excuses to believe they're right. I've seen it before." Violet hesitated. What will happen to her? She face a tribunal in Portsmouth. "I'll speak for her if they allow it." Agnes sipped her tea. She deserves justice, not vengeance. Violet's eyes fell to the folded papers on the table, the codes, the ration book fragments, the map. And Major Blake, they found his body. Agnes shook her head. No, the sea keeps its own counsel. Silence settled between them, broken only by the ticking of the mantel clock and the wind moaning faintly through the chimney. A knock came at the door, firm, familiar. Violet tensed, but Onnes's expression remained calm. "Open it," she said. It was Constable Webb, his arm bandaged, his uniform damp from the mist. 2 soldiers stood behind him, rifles slung. "Mrs. Penrose," he said stiffly, "the War Office wants all documents concerning your investigation." "I'm sure they do," she replied. "And what does the War Office intend to do with them?" "File them away until no one remembers." He flinched at the edge in her tone. "It's not my decision." "No," Agnes said. "It never was." She turned, gathering her notes into an envelope. "But you'll take them. Tell your superiors to read every line. And remind them the dead deserve more than secrecy." He took the envelope with a small bow, guilt flickering briefly across his face. When the men left, Violet shut the door with relief. "I don't trust them," she whispered. "They'll bury the truth." "Then we'll make it harder to bury," Agnes said. She reached for a notebook, her own record of the case, written in her small, deliberate hand. "I'll keep my version, just as I did after France in the last war. Facts fade, stories endure." That afternoon, the fog lifted, revealing the wounded coastline where so much had unfolded. Agnes walked to the cliffs alone, her shawl wrapped tight against the wind. The path was slick with moss, the sea below restless and grey. She stopped near the place where Major Blake had fallen. The edge was still, raw from the slide, a scar of earth above the roaring surf. For a long moment she stared downward, her expression unreadable. "Was it worth it?" she murmured to the wind. "The codes, the lies, the deaths, did any of it save your England, or only destroy the better part of yourself?" The waves answered only with foam and thunder. Behind her, footsteps approached. She turned to see Major Hargreaves, a tall man in a dark overcoat. The new officer sent from Portsmouth. His tone was clipped but respectful. "Mrs. Penrose, you've caused quite a stir in the intelligence office." "I'm sure they dislike civilians doing their work," she said. "On the contrary," he replied, glancing toward the sea. "You've done it better than most. Merritt's confession has uncovered a wider ring. Two naval clerks in Plymouth have been detained. It seems this quiet village was the mouthpiece of something far larger. Omnes's brows lifted slightly. Then you've found the rest of them. Not all. Some escaped when the storm struck. But the tide leaves traces. It always does. He paused, studying her. You could have been killed. Why take the risk? She smiled faintly. Because the truth is rather like the sea, Major. It always returns, no matter how often men try to dam it. He gave a small nod. If you ever tire of teaching, London could use minds like yours. I've had enough of war, she said quietly. My classroom is battlefield enough. He looked as though he might argue, then simply saluted. Good day, Mrs. Penrose, and thank you. When he was gone, she turned back to the sea. A shaft of sunlight pierced the clouds, glinting on the waves where Blake had vanished. She felt no triumph, only the weary calm that follows duty fulfilled. That evening, Violet joined her for supper. The radio murmured in the corner, carrying the BBC's familiar measured voice. In London today, Prime Minister Churchill praised the vigilance of Britain's coastal towns in the face of espionage threats. Violet smiled faintly. That means you, doesn't it? Agnes stirred her soup. It means there are fewer enemies tonight than there were last week. That's enough. They ate in silence for a while, listening to the crackle of the broadcast. Then Violet said, I've decided to leave Brindleford after the term ends, perhaps join the WAAF. I want to do something useful. You've already done something useful, Agnes said, setting down her spoon. You told the truth when no one else dared. The world doesn't need louder heroes, only braver ones. Violet smiled, her eyes bright. You sound like my teacher again. I never stopped being one. Agnes leaned back, gazing at the small lamp flickering beside the window. Teaching is only another kind of war, against ignorance, against forgetting. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of salt and wet earth. Somewhere far out at sea, a convoy's low horn echoed faintly through the night. Agnes rose, moving to the window. The blackout curtain brushed her hand. She hesitated before drawing it fully closed. For once, she left it slightly open, allowing a single sliver of lamplight to fall onto the street. Violet noticed. Aren't we supposed to keep it covered? Perhaps, Agnes said softly, but the war will end one day, and when it does, people will need to remember what light looks like. She watched the beam stretch, faintly into the dark, fragile but unwavering, like a promise that even storms must keep. The clock struck 10, the radio fell silent. In the quiet that followed, the wind hummed through the eaves, a sound neither mournful nor triumphant, but truthful. Mrs. Penrose closed her notebook, placed it on the mantel, and whispered, "For the record." Then she turned off the lamp, and the house settled into peace, while outside the sea continued its endless conversation with the wind, the last witness to what had been hidden and what had been found. Chapter 10. The morning after. The next morning broke in pale gold, the first clear sunrise Brindleford-on-Sea had seen in weeks. The storm had blown itself out overnight, leaving the streets slick and glistening, the sky washed clean of soot. Smoke rose from cottage chimneys once again, thin and blue, and for the first time in a long while, the air smelled only of sea salt and bread. Mrs. Agnes Penrose woke early, not from alarm or habit, but from a quiet restlessness. Her small house felt strangely large after so many nights of suspense and visitors. The kettle on the stove hissed softly, and she listened to it as though it were a living thing. Every sound seemed sharper that morning, the coo of a pigeon outside her window, the soft patter of a stray cat's paws across the yard, even the far-off bell of the parish church. She poured her tea and stood by the window, looking toward the sea. In the distance, the waves glimmered under sunlight, the horizon sharp and clean. It was hard to imagine that only 2 nights ago, that same coast had swallowed 2 lives and nearly claimed her own. A gentle knock at the door broke her reverie. She already knew who it was. Violet Crane stepped in, carrying a basket wrapped in a towel. "Mrs. Hewitt sent this," she said with a smile. "Fresh rolls, and an extra coupon of butter. She said you'd earned it." Agnes smiled faintly. War or no war, the village still runs on gossip and gratitude. "That's reassuring." Violet's smile faded as she glanced around the sitting room. "It feels quiet today, almost a quiet." "Yes," Agnes said softly. "That's how peace always begins, like the pause between breaths. You never know if it will last." Violet sat down by the fire. "They took Dr. Merritt to Portsmouth yesterday. People are divided. Some think she was brave, others call her a traitor." "She was both," Agnes said, stirring her tea. "Courage and sign live closer than we like to think." Violet looked up, hesitant. "Will you go to the hearing? If they'll have me." She deserves a voice that remembers she was human, not just useful. The younger woman nodded, then reached into her coat. "This came for you. From the Home Office, I think." She handed over a brown envelope. Agnes tore it open carefully. Inside was a short, typed letter signed by Major Hargreaves, "Mrs. Penrose. Your assistance in the recent Brindleford investigation has been noted and commended. Officially, the matter is now closed. Unofficially, I am instructed to tell you this. You may have saved more lives than you know. Respectfully, R. Hargreaves, Intelligence Division." Agnes folded the letter and placed it aside without expression. "Officially closed," she murmured, "such tidy words for such untidy things." Violet leaned forward. "You don't seem relieved." "I'm grateful," Agnes said slowly, "but relief is for those who've finished something. I fear I've only begun to understand what this war is truly doing to people." They sat for a time in comfortable silence. The fire crackled softly outside. The sky turned a deeper blue, the village waking into another day. "Do you think it's really over?" Violet asked finally. "The killings?" "Yes," said Agnes. "The fear, not yet. Fear doesn't end with victory. It lingers, quiet and invisible, until someone else mistakes it for duty." Violet shivered slightly, drawing her shawl tighter. "And you? What will you do now?" Agnes smiled faintly. "I'll teach, I'll bake, I'll tell stories to children who don't yet know what shadows caused, and someday, when this war ends, I'll forget none of it." Her gaze drifted to the notebook on the mantel, her chronicle of the past weeks. Its pages were full now, times, names, confessions, even the fragments of her own fears. The temptation to burn it had crossed her mind more than once, but she couldn't. The truth was like fire itself, dangerous, cleansing, necessary. Later that afternoon, the church bell rang again, not for warning or mourning this time, but for service. Father Shaw's successor, a young curate barely 25, had invited her to speak to the congregation. She'd declined a formal address, but she went anyway, sitting quietly at the back. The chapel smelled of damp hymnals and fresh lilac. The broken window pane had been replaced, though the glass still shimmered faintly where lightning had once struck it. Villagers filled the pews, fishermen, nurses, children clutching ration bags. Even after all they'd seen, they came. Humanity, she thought, was stubborn that way. The curate spoke of courage and faith, his voice trembling but sincere. Agnes listened, her eyes half closed. She wasn't thinking of scripture, but of faces, Arthur Talbot with his kind smile, Father Shaw's gentle wisdom, Dr. Merritt's haunted eyes, and even Major Blake's final expression, a man who had bartered too much of himself. When the hymns began, Violet's voice joined the others, thin but clear. Agnes found herself humming too. The sound was imperfect but honest, like a wound beginning to heal. That evening, she walked again to the cliffs. The air was crisp, the light fading into a soft rose gold that kissed the horizon. The tide was low, and gulls wheeled lazily above the foam. From up here, Brindleford looked small, fragile, yet enduring. She carried her notebook under her arm. When she reached the fence near the edge, she paused and opened it to the last page. Her handwriting was neat as ever. The war continues, but not as before. There are guns and there are lies, and both kill. Yet somewhere between them stands the truth, frail, stubborn, luminous. We must guard it as we guard life itself. A. Penrose. She closed the book, tied it with a ribbon, and slipped it back into her coat. Down below, the waves murmured against the rocks. The same sea that had hidden crimes now glimmered innocently under the fading light. Agnes drew a slow breath and whispered, "Rest now. All of you." The wind carried her words out over the water. When she returned to the village, lamps were being lit one by one. The blackout orders had eased for the first time, a trial of trust, the authorities called it. For Agnes, it was something more. As she walked past the schoolhouse, she saw children playing by the fence, their laughter floating into the dusk. It was the best sound she'd heard in months. At her door, Violet waited, smiling. "You left your window open," she said. "I thought you'd want the light to show." Agnes smiled back. "Yes, let it, inside." The fire glowed warmly. The kettle sang again, as though nothing had ever happened. Agnes poured 2 cups of tea, one for herself, and one for the young woman who had become her shadow, her pupil, and perhaps her hope, to peace, Violet said quietly. Agnes raised her cup. "To truth," she replied. The rarer of the two, outside. The evening sky cleared, revealing the first bright stars above the sea. And in the heart of Brindleford-on-Sea, in a small house with a steady light burning in its window, Mrs. Penrose finally allowed herself to rest, not in victory, but in the fragile, enduring calm of a world that had chosen, for one brief morning, not to hide from its own light. I am glad that you are still here. Thanks for watching it. Please like the video and subscribe the channel if you liked the video. Thanks.